Right, I'm just going to create one video, but it's going to cover the three different programs, okay? So it's just the first three exercises. So if you're fine with the first two, just obviously fast forward the video into the one that you're after, okay? Now, the first two exercises where you've got a working program, so this one's just calculating the volume, right? So I'll ask you what's a 10, 10, 10, multiply them together and give you 1,000, okay? You might be thinking, well, what's the point? What are we doing with this if it's already working? When I talk about subprograms and modularity, it just means the same, okay? So think of modules as being separate wee entities. It's the same subprograms, that they're basically wee bits of code that do an individual task, okay? And what we can do is we can split up a program that you'd be normally used to in National 5 level, we can split that up into subprograms. Now, what we'll say, a lot of these programs, when you look at it, you'll be thinking, what's the point? Because when you're splitting up into a sub kind of module program, it's actually more coding. But just think of the kind of, if you're writing a massive program, you could have different people working in different modules, okay, and then bring them all together. And it makes the program more readable as well, having, you know, what area of the code does a specific task, okay. Now, what we've got, this naturally lends itself into being in three separate subprograms or modules. One that's going to get all the dimensions, the other one that's going to calculate the volume, and the other one that's going to display the volume. Now what we've got down here is a wee space for you to actually come up with names for different functions that are going to do a specific task. Okay, so what we have is we've got these, split these up into separate wee functions or separate subprograms, and this main program or top level program, what that does is it calls the subprogram when it needs it. It might have to give it some values, so it might, and when it's given it values, it's called passing parameters, okay? So it might have to give it some values in order for that subprogram to do its task. It then might be waiting for these values to come out the subprogram so it can save it into its variables, okay? So it's called parameter passing. When we are talking about moving variables or the contents of variables from main programs to subprograms, we talk about parameter passing, okay? So if you think about this one, if you've got a subprogram that's just to get dimensions, the main program doesn't need to give it any information, because the whole point of this subprogram is to ask the user to type in three numbers, okay? What this main program will want though are these numbers back to it, right? So it can save them in a variable. We'll just call it length, breadth, height. This one is a wee bit different in that it's going to require length, breadth and height in order to calculate the volume. So the main program not just has to call this subprogram to do this job, it has to then say, by the way, here's three values for you to actually do your job, right? What we'll do, we'll just get cracking on with this. Now, I'm just going to, we'll call this one, we'll define it, okay? And this is, we'll say, right, get dimensions, or we'll just say get inputs, right? Get inputs. If I could spell inputs, that would be fantastic. But considering volume's spelt with an N there, don't have much hope. Right. Okay, we're going to get inputs, right? Now there's nothing in the brackets because we're not having to pass it in information, okay? This purpose of this get inputs is so to get information from the user. Now we're going to just indent it a bit, and we're going to call, it's quite common to call the wee variables used within a function or one of these subprograms just to abbreviate it to what you're actually storing. You don't need to, but it's just quite common, okay? Now what we've got down here is we're going to, and it might take a couple of these for it to sink in, right? Because it is quite different from doing National 5, right? Get dimension, get inputs, I'll just say, okay? Right, so what this is going to do, this is going to say, right, get inputs, wake up, right? And you're going to run the bit of code that's within this subprogram, okay? So it says, okay, well, enter the length and it stores in a variable called L. Get the breadth, stores in a variable called B. Get the height, stores it in a variable called H. Now, it's storing these values. This can't access it yet, so it actually has to return the value, right? So it has to then come out the other end of it. So we're going to return length. breadth and height, and how you return it is in the same order that you have here. So what actually, think of these as being 3 empty boxes. So it calls this function, it then gets values in, saves them into these variables, into this function. It then returns it in the order in which you're wanting to store it. So whatever's in L will get sent and stored in the variable length. Whatever's in D will get sent, or B even, can't spell B, gets stored in the variable breadth, and whatever's in H gets stored in the variable height. Okay, so this is basically where we're passing parameters to and from the main program to the functions. Okay, now if I run it, what we've got here, name length is not specified. So that's line 17, right? So it's not going to run just now because it's still looking at these bits of code and it's still trying to suss out what it's doing. So that's the first one, right? Second one, we're going to get the volume, right? Now on the left hand side, this is the values it's going to store the inputs back from the functions. Okay, so whatever this function does, it's going to return length, breadth and height. Whatever this function does, it's going to return the height. We'll call it calc volume, and what we need to pass it is we need to pass it the length, we need to pass it the breadth, and we need to pass it the height. Okay, so calculate volume. So what will happen is I'll call this function, so we need to declare it. Okay, so calc, and it has to be same spelling, same case, right? So within the procedures or the functions, just use the abbreviation of the variable names. Okay, so we've got volume equals length, and you don't need to, but you'll see a lot of documentation doing it this way. So what's happening there is it's now saying, right, call calc volume function. Going to pass it what values are stored in length, breadth and height. So it stores that and it saves them. So it passes the parameters and it saves them. So these are actual parameters and these are the actual variables. These are the formal ones. So it will store whatever's in length. It will store temporarily store in L. Same with B and same with H. I will then say volume is equal length times breadth times height. It then returns V, and the contents of V gets passed and stored into the variable called volume. Okay, so if I run this, need the colon there. Okay, so we're down to here now. Okay, so what we've got is we've called get inputs. It's passed back length, breadth and height, calculate volume, so we just need to then display volume. Now we've not got an equal sign because we're not actually requiring it to send back anything to the main program. Okay, you only have equal signs or anything to the left of your equal sign if you're actually requiring data to be sent back to it and stored in it. All this is doing is actually just displaying it. Okay, so what we'll do, this is this, and one wee thing you might want to do is see if you write the name down, just copy and paste it up. At least if it's misspelled both ways, right? So we're going to, that's the formal parameter, right? So display volume, it will say, right, here's the value in the volume variable. It then saves it in its own wee variable called V. It will then just print that out. Okay, and again, you've added loads of code, so you'll be thinking, what's the point? But this is just, you'll see the more of the point, the bigger the program gets. Right. So if I run this, enter length 10, enter breadth 10, enter height 10, right, and the volume. Okay, so you've added a lot more code in order to get this program working. Okay, so anything to the left is actually expecting values to be returned from the definition. Okay, sorry, from the function or the procedure or the module or subprogram, whatever you want to call it. So it's expecting these values to be sent back and returned, okay? You tend to just have these as being abbreviations of the actual variable names, but you have to return them, you have to receive them and return them in the correct order, okay? So that's essentially a wee run through into what you're doing in the first practical one. What I'll do, I'll just go into the second one, right? So the second one is just to do with the speed and distance, right? And you're working out, what you're working out, calculating the speed of the car, okay? So what we need to do is, first of all, we're going to get rid of this, right? So what we're doing is we're going to get the inputs, we're then going to calculate speeds and then display the speed, right? So we'll call this, we'll define this as get inputs. Now, you're not passing it any information because it's basically getting the inputs, which just requires the user to type in anything. It doesn't require the main program or the top level program to actually send it any information, okay? So just shorten it to D and T, and then we're just going to return that. Again, it's all practice, these things, so you'll be flying through after, right? So we need to actually call this. So what we're needing is for it to return distance and time, and it returns it by calling this get inputs. Okay, so again this is saying, right, get inputs, calls that one, and then asks for distance, asks for time, and then it returns distance and time. It saves whatever is in D into distance, whatever's in T into time. Okay. Next one is we're going to calculate speed. Right, so define that, and we'll just say calc speed. Okay, and we'll be passing it distance and time. So I'll just abbreviate it to whatever it's in the brackets. It has to be in the body of the main subprogram. Okay, and then we're just going to return s, right? So we need to write that. So we're going to need speed return from the calc speed procedure, and it's distance and time. Okay, so what that's saying is going to call this calc speed and take the values distance and time and store it in these variables D and T, so actual parameters, formal parameters. Work out your recalculation, and whatever you've got stored in S, you pass it back and store it in the variable speed. Okay, and last one, we're not having to have an equal sign because we're not expecting it to return any values to the top level program. We're just expecting it to actually display. So we're just going to say define a function to display speed. Alright, so we need to pass it the actual speed. And then that's it. Okay, so we're just going to display the speed there. So what we're then going to do is go this speed. I'll be amazed if this works first time. Okay, double check it's all the same. Calc speed DT, right, forgot my wee colons there. Right, 100 miles, 2 hours, should be okay. So let's see what's back there. Well, it's not needing anything to do with 2 decimal places, is it? So 100 miles, 2 hours, 50 miles per hour, right? And that's you. Okay, so again, each line represents each module or subprogram or procedure or function, right? What's to the left is values it's expecting it to be returned back, and these are the variables that will be stored in. Okay, so these are like wee temporary variables. Okay, and if you're getting it to display something, you don't need to return anything back to the main program. Actual parameters, formal parameters, they're essentially shortened versions of the actual parameters, and they're used within the function, okay? So if you're referring to distance as d, use that within the calculation, right?